welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with some friends who are competent and excessively resentful. First, I hold him profoundly in contempt. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
It's time to take back what is rightfully ours. Let's party. Hi, Jen. How are you?
I'm glad you're ready to party. I'm good. And he's got it in him to make it epic. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
I like lasagna. Oh, wait, you said Furiosa? I thought we were doing the number one movie of the weekend. Dang it. Jen, you messed me up.
Wow. Preview of the sad conversation to come, I suppose. And last but not least, he will rule with me in the splendor of a new Wasteland. It's Antonio Alifano. Are you ready, steady, Antonio?
You fabulous thing. You crawled out of a pitiless grave deeper than hell. Only one thing that is going to do that for you, not hope, hate. No shame and hate. It's one of the greatest forces of nature. I'm doing great.
Bravo. That was well done. I was kind of curious. I'm like, is anyone going to attempt an Australian accent? I thought about it because I feel like I've had to read enough Bluey books to my kids that I'm like, maybe I could do it. I do it for them, but it's entirely different. It's an entirely different
What I was
situation.
hoping was someone who wasn't me would remember the line from The History Man that was, "Do you know how to write? Because I can teach you. If you make yourself useful, you'll be protected." And I feel like that would have worked really well for us. But it's so early in the movie, it's hard to hold in our minds.
Yeah. I thought of a bunch of quotes and then couldn't find like the exact wording and then backed off. So I hear you. Anyway, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, the newest installment in George Miller's post-apocalyptic dystopian franchise. The film is a prequel to the 2015 film Mad Max Fury Road. This movie follows the life of Imperator Furiosa as she is kidnapped as a child and becomes embroiled in the harsh realities of the Wasteland. Anya Taylor-Joy, which most probably would know from The Queen's Gambit, Netflix show, she stars as the younger version of the character Charlize Theron played in Fury Road, and Chris Hemsworth co-stars as a new character, a kooky warlord. Had a hard time coming up with the right adjective there. Named Dementus. You can see Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga in theaters now. And as Greg alluded to, please do, because it's not doing well at the box office. We'll talk about that later. And eventually it will appear on the streaming service formerly known as HBO Max. But if you're listening to us for the first time, just to kind of set the ground rules, we'll have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And then with a very clear spoiler alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners think we're full, viable humans after listening to this episode, what can they do?
While they're waiting for their peach pits to blossom into new trees, you can check out new episodes when they drop. Please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcast. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, and really wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us for updates on Instagram and Threads at the Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod.
Thanks, PT. So we are just about ready to get into our discussion of Furiosa. But first, we have a notable, but probably fairly brief movie news update.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
Thanks, recorded Greg. Not actual Greg who's here. So the big news that I wanted to make sure we sort of touch base with was, on our last episode, the review of I Saw the TV Glow, PT and I sort of talked about early reviews coming out of Cannes. But now we have actual winners. So the Palme d'Or, which is like the huge big prize that everyone wants, went to Sean Baker's Anora, which was a romance between a young stripper and a Russian oligarch.
That old story. God, how many times I got to make that
old
movie?
Chestnut. And yeah, we can mention. Actually, now I'll just mention them all, and then we can react and discuss. The Grand Prix prize, which is sort of second place, went to a film out of India called All We Imagine as Light, which I've heard really, really positive reviews of. It's two women who go on a road trip to a beach town and work out their respective relationship issues along the way. The log line for that was kind of cagey, so I don't actually know what that movie's about. And then the jury prize went to a musical crime comedy called Emilia Perez, which stars Zoe Saldana and Selena Gomez, two other actresses that our listeners probably be less familiar with, but sound like the four of them actually won the Best Actress prize, which is a little unprecedented. So instead of me rattling on more information, I'll just leave it at that and open it up for discussion. Any surprises? What does this mean for the Oscar race? Because this is the sort of the actual start of Oscar season.
I want to add one more thing. Jesse Plemons winning Best Actor, right, for Kinds of Kindness. I've loved that. I've loved him ever since the TV version of Friday Night Lights, and I've loved seeing him in movies. He tends to play this sort of like everyman character, and it's easy to take for granted just how good and how funny he can be. So I'm glad that he's getting like this showcase for his talents in this film, and a movie that I was already excited about. I'm even more excited to see now.
Yeah, I was very happy to see that as well.
Yeah.
Me too. The big news feels like Sean Baker leveling up, like, and seeming like, getting the Palme d'Or has been not necessarily a direct path, but a very of a likely way forward into a Best Picture nomination, and a lot of resulting nominations that come along with that. So it feels like it's positioned this movie, Anora, that I felt like was very much. I don't know if we've ever talked about it. I don't think it's ever come up. It was just sort of a thing that
we
existed.
Did not flag it last time.
Yeah, and well, I mean, even in looking towards the year that there's like a Sean Baker movie coming out, I don't recall anyone ever thinking about it or talking about it. And now it's immediately in the conversation. So that's great for him, and I'm excited to see that movie and really all of these movies.
Just gonna ask if anybody's seen Red Rocket, which I think you are also going to connect to Sean Baker, right?
I was gonna sort of say most people probably would know him more for the Florida Project, because I feel like that is Willem Dafoe, and I feel like got a lot more awards attention in its time. But yeah, Red Rocket, I remember amongst critics was people loved Simon Rex, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the one who's in that? Yeah.
Willem Dafoe did get an Oscar nomination for Florida Project.
Okay.
But also Tangerine and Red Rocket are the sort of his major movies. He had a few before then as well, but those are, it's sort of, each one feels like it's been ratcheting up the prominence, and now it seems like he may have arrived.
Yeah, and first American filmmaker to win the Palme d'Or in, I want to say, like 11 years. I don't know. I saw a stat that was like, whoa.
Yeah.
So that gives an extra potential Oscars bump, right? And more in recent years, the Cannes Film Festival Palme d'Or winner has showed up at the Oscars, right? Like I feel like that's a fairly recent trend as the Academy gets more international. But yeah, anything else jump out at you as particularly notable from the Cannes Awards, or just like how Cannes wrapped up?
Where's Megalopolis? Right? It's not here on this list somehow. Because I've only reacted in text message to the group, I will just say on air, I'm still totally behind my pick for Megalopolis. It sounds like it's absolutely crazy, and I'm here for it. Like, I would rather a movie get 5s and 1s in equal measure on Letterboxd than like solid 4s. So I'm still excited, even though it does sound like it did not impress. Well, and the counterpoint, you mentioned it last episode, was Horizon New Dawn, which got a resounding meh from the crowd at Cannes. It's like nobody cared enough to pan it. It's just like, it's 3 hours and it's completely boring. Whereas, Megalopolis, people are like, I don't know what I just saw, but I'm a changed person. So I'm still in.
Right.
I'm going to win the hype draft. I believe in it, especially once we hear how Antonio felt about tonight's film.
Damn.
Ouch. Wow. Throwing down the gauntlet. Even before we get to the movie we're talking about. That's great. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything to add about Megalopolis other than we'll see. Wait, does this movie still not have a North American distributor?
No, it does not.
It's incredible.
I believe it's distributed everywhere, but North America, or all major markets, but North America.
Right. Yeah.
There's like 15 or 16 like
that's the important one for
Yeah.
Francis Ford Coppola, an American filmmaker.
You know,
Well,
he gave an award to George Lucas.
When he gave the honorary award to George Lucas, he literally shook George Lucas to shake free some of those Disney billions, and now he can release Megalopolis. It's no problem. Totally fine.
It's actually exclusively playing at a screen at Skywalker Ranch. So, Greg, get your flight booked so you can go see it.
I was kind of thinking that because they had lots of photos where the two of them were like very close to each other. And I just can imagine Francis Ford Coppola leaning in and being like, I need more money, George. Yeah. Anyway. The other thing is, and this is like from pundits and critics that I've been tracking this week, people seem very confused by the Best Screenplay Award for The Substance, which PT and I did flag last episode. This is the Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley body horror film. And people were just like, I'm glad it got an award. Screenplay seems like an odd choice. And so that might partially be just because like they really wanted to give it something and they couldn't justify putting it in any of the other categories, I guess. I don't know. So I don't know, because of the genre, I don't think that one has as much Oscar traction as a carryover, but still something to look out for in the coming year. But yeah.
I'll just note, because I looked it up real quick, the only other American filmmakers to win the Palme d'Or in the last 30 years are Terrence Malick for The Tree of Life, Gus Van Sant for Elephant, and Michael Moore for Fahrenheit 9/11 in consecutive years, and then Quentin Tarantino for Pulp Fiction in 1994. So there's a bunch before then, but that's sort of the gap of the last 30 years. It was pretty well, it's pretty sparse in the last 30 years. It's only just those handful.
All right. So yeah, this is an even bigger deal, I would say. And the only last thing that I'll mention is like, and this is mostly because the three of you, as not being as insane as me, as like following all the reactions to something like this, apparently the special prize is like a participation trophy, because they don't normally have this special prize that went to The Seed of the Sacred Fig by Mohammed Rasulov. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. But apparently this director is like, he defected from Iran and is like on the run and showed up at Cannes for the screening of this movie. And the movie is in part a lot about like a lot of the protests that are happening there. And apparently there was a lot of speculation amongst critics who were at Cannes to be like, did they just give this because they felt like they had to because of the political importance? And like, isn't that kind of a jerk move? Like, just give it a regular award. So that's the only tea I have to spill from the Cannes coverage.
Sorry, you can't go home, but here's a trophy.
Right, like that's gonna help.
These damn millennials and their participation trophies.
Jen, was there a Palme d'Og winner this year?
I did investigate this, and what was confusing is that there were two Palme d'Og related things that I saw. One was for the actual winner, who was a dog from a movie called Trial by Dog, I want to say is the movie.
It's Dog on Trial.
Dog, thank you. Not
Previously known as Who Let the Dog Bite.
Oh, wow. Okay.
According to the Wikipedia
so that's
page.
the actual winner. But the thing that was coming up when I was looking it up is that they had like a Palme d'Og quote unquote moment or something like that, and it was like a series of dogs in this other movie, and I can't remember the name of the movie now.
Well,
so yeah, sorry, this is poor journalism on my part.
Luckily there is a Wikipedia page for the Palme d'Og Award. There's Cody as Cosmos seems to be listed as the Palme d'Og. The same award that Messi won last year as Snoop in Anatomy of a Fall. Very important. Then there's a grand jury prize similar to the movies that went to Jin Xin, the dog named Jin, for a movie called Black Dog. And then Mutt Moment is listed as going to all 3 hype draft entrants: Megalopolis, Bird, and Kinds of Kindness. So
wow,
lots of dogs, and there's your Megalopolis award.
Yes.
Greg, Megalopolis has
there you
one.
go. We got it.
Bird
Jump
has
on
one.
the train,
Kinds of
my
Kindness
friends.
has 2. Kinds of Kindness has 2. That's double. That's double both of yours. So let's just note that.
And wait,
I'm looking forward to the row on the spreadsheet that's tracking the Palm Dog for our hype draft picks.
who has Kinds of Kindness? Is that a Jen or is that a PT?
PT does, yeah.
Okay.
I do.
That's PT.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
do you think I'd be pointing out how many awards it got if Jen had drafted it?
keeping that real quiet otherwise. Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to my guy Messi, like because I saw so much footage of him like walking around with a little doggy GoPro and like handing people awards and just like being a boss on the red carpet. So like, yeah, love that.
Returning champion.
Yeah,
Messi.
He's like, this is how it's done, other dogs. Like, take note. Are you on a t-shirt? No, I am. Anyway. Okay, we've dragged this out long enough. Let's get to Furiosa. So I want to start with our short takes. What was your general reaction to Furiosa? Let's start with Greg.
So I think we covered our history with this franchise in our prep episode, but I will remind listeners that I think I came last to Fury Road, and it was 100% in my own house. And so I went into this movie having only ever watched Fury Road twice, once when I first watched it and then for our podcast prep. And I think that is worth mentioning because I thought this was fantastic and I had a great time at the movies. And I think that is absolutely curved by, I did not experience Fury Road I didn't go to IMAX. I went to Dolby. I'm becoming a Dolby person, which I'm trying to come to terms with, but it's just like unbelievable sound, unbelievable picture quality that just blew me away. Literally, not exaggerating, my giant vanilla Coke shook every time the war rig came on screen because it had that low rumble. And I was like, this is cinema. This is why we come to the movies. I sit through a million not worth getting out of the house movies for a night out like this. So I am not without quibbles. There are things I would like to unpack and discuss with you all, but I definitely recommend this. I had a great time. I'm going to pass the baton to Antonio, though, because this is his hype draft, and I already teased what his reaction may be. So go for it.
Yeah. So I was very excited for this movie because I love Mad Max Fury Road. If I mentioned earlier that it was in its year, it was my favorite movie of that year, and which is a little bit of an unusual pick for me. I knew pretty early on in Furiosa that this was going to be a different experience, and that I wasn't going to be able to absorb this movie in the same way. And I sort of as I was watching, I was like, I should have figured this out a little bit earlier, given the structure and just even the trailers. But what I'll say at this point for the short take was that Fury Road was a movie that I watched with kind of gleeful abandon, where it was just like nonstop action and it was just fun, and I was grateful for the occasional slivers of sort of interesting ideas speckled across the ride. Furiosa, by contrast, as much as there's a lot that I really liked about the film, and a lot of sequences that I found to be really thrilling and equal to Fury Road, but I watched it in a different state of mind. Like I watched it with a slight dread at what was going to happen to our protagonist. So it was a thrilling movie, but not a joyful one, and I kind of missed the joy. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, and I'll kick it to PT.
I'm very interested to talk more about this because I think that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, Antonio. I'm more on the Greg side. I had a great time. with this, but I did go in having sort of absorbed from the ads for it, from the interviews that were coming out before it came out, that George Miller at least was trying to really position this as like, this is not Fury Road again. Like, this is going to be different. And I think that was very wise. I think that if he just tried to do another kind of nonstop front to back action movie at that level, it would have felt really hollow. I don't know if he could have hit that again. And so I really appreciate that he did something that is not only different from Fury Road, but kind of different from all the Mad Max movies by having it be this long kind of epic story. It's almost like he took like what we had 3 Max movies before Fury Road. He's like, okay, well, I only have time to make one Furiosa movie, but I'm going to cover a lot of different stories, maybe perhaps somewhat similarly. And I think that when we get to the recommendation algorithm, I've got like a breakdown that I don't think holds up to what both Antonio and Greg have already said, but that's fine. But I just think that like George Miller is uniquely successful at filming action sequences and particularly chase sequences. And this movie has some more excellent examples of that and really builds out the world, which, maybe some people don't want more explanations or more sort of angles on stuff where they're like, yeah, it was fine, I got enough of it before. But if you have any, I had a great time seeing more out of all of that, and I look forward to speaking of it more. Jen, what's your short take?
You mean people don't want to know more about the economics of a world that's been previously established? And
well, all I'm saying is I'm glad we finally have a prequel on a mostly sandy landscape where the plot really breaks down around failed trade negotiations. I'm glad we finally have that. So I think it's important.
Thank you. I had to sneak a Star Wars reference in there somewhere. So my short take is I'm kind of in between Antonio and PT and Greg. I really enjoyed this movie. I had a great time. I think I left the theater being like fist up in the air. Yeah, like this, like that was amazing. It took me a little while to get settled in, I want to say. So I wasn't really sold and locked into the movie until the second act. And we'll get into why and what happens in the first act that maybe was not selling me. So I do have some questions, some of which I put in our Google Doc about the structure of the movie. And I'm just left wondering, like, why was it structured in this particular way? Again, we'll get into it. So that was kind of my mostly my hang up. I really enjoyed the performances in this a lot. And so Anya Taylor-Joy, I think, is fantastic. I've heard other people say otherwise. I don't agree. I think she's doing a great job. And I really like Chris Hemsworth was so entertaining. And we'll get into like his role and his contribution to this film and the franchise, I think, a little bit later, but I really enjoyed him. I have some questions about the choices that he's making or that George Miller is making for him, in a way that, like, I think explains other people's criticisms of the movie. But yeah, I think in general, I'm kind of I love this. I would go see it again. It's still not quite achieving the Fury Road levels for me. Yeah. All right. So recommendation algorithm. This is where we establish the audience of the film. So, I mean, the first thing I thought of was like, and this is only because this came up during our Dune coverage, where it was like people are actually asking, can I just watch this movie? Do I have to watch the other movies? Do we have a succinct answer for that for this one?
I say yes. I think that you absolutely can. Then, and in some instances, then they may have the maybe joyous experience of then going and seeing Fury Road, which, as much as I like Furiosa, I think part of why Furiosa works so well is they didn't try to top Fury Road, which also means maybe implicitly it isn't better than Fury Road. So you get a chance to see this movie, and then the next one, maybe they should just dash out right when the directed by title card comes up, so they don't like see scenes from a future episode, which is kind of what happens at the end of the movie.
can that be a public service announcement as opposed to a spoiler?
I think so. I think
it qualifies.
Yeah.
PT invited me to watch with him, but I couldn't. I had an appointment at the same time, so I couldn't watch it with him on Thursday. So I watched it on Friday. My wife would not watch it with me. So one of my favorite students, I was like, watch this with me. Please watch this with me. And he was like, well, my girlfriend's from out of town. I was like, I'll take you both. Let's go.
Are you sure you didn't say witness? Like, you didn't say witness me? Like, witness me watch this movie?
So they came to watch this movie with me. I realized very early on that this couple who'd been dating for 2 years had actually never seen a movie together, because his girlfriend doesn't like watching movies. So their first time to go to the movies was of course with his writing professor. But anyway, she had never seen any of the Mad Max movies. He had seen 30 minutes of Fury Road, didn't like it, and turned it off. So I do feel a little bad that I was like, I need someone to watch this. Come watch this with me. But I will say this: the person who liked it the most was her. The person who had never seen any Mad Max movies. At the end of the movie, because I think I don't even know why I knew it was a good movie, but it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. So then I felt a little bad. I was like, I'm sorry if you didn't really like it, but she was like, I really had a good time. I thought that was great. So I'm not sure if she's gonna go off and see Fury Road, but she seemed the most like she was the most into it, right? And again, I thought, as a prequel, I think that makes some sense, because I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but like, since we know things that happen in Fury Road, we know certain things that can't happen in the prequel, right? So I think that going into Furiosa with this sort of like endless possibilities, still out there, I think that actually could enhance the movie going experience and the excitement of seeing the outcome.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Maybe she didn't like going to the movies because she hadn't seen pure cinema. And so now that she has, she's ready to go back.
Maybe.
Yeah. What have you just done? What kind of catalyst have you been? So that's a really interesting idea. And I feel like something we really should note, and this I think belongs in the recommendation algorithm, is that this movie was conceived as backstory for Fury Road, right? George Miller wrote, I don't know if it was necessarily in screenplay form, but he wrote the entire story for this movie as a way to be like, I'm going to flesh out Furiosa as a character, right? And to me, it really feels like that. It feels like a biography of this character more than Fury Road, I think, is a sort of singular and very focused, hyper-focused story, right? So I think that's something, and maybe this gets into my next question of like, how do we manage expectations for folks who have seen and love Fury Road? And like, we've already mentioned that this is decidedly and purposefully not Fury Road and not trying to be like Fury Road. So like, without spoiling it, how is it different, or how do we manage the expectations of someone who's expecting a more Fury Road?
Well, my thinking may be thrown askew by it made sense in my head on the bus ride home from the movie theater, but now that I'm speaking to human beings who have their own opinions, they may not think this way. But my thinking was, if you liked Fury Road and you were like, I love that world, like I love sort of the Wasteland, all the cool cars and all that stuff, you're going to get way more of that. You're going to get a lot more of that. I think you're going to have a really good time with this movie if that's what you liked about this. If you liked it for just like the action and the action sort of choreography and the filmmaking, it's not as constant as Fury Road, but there are multiple action sequences that will get you there. Will get you to those heights and be like, oh my God, yes. Like, these are things I've never seen. Incredible. I love it. But if you liked it for being a cinematic experience that was sort of constantly propulsive, always moving you forward, and never really explaining anything or having like times to be like, well, then that's what this means. Just be like, figure it out. Like you'll have to just deal with that on the run. That's not what this movie is. This movie's a lot, you have it right, Jen. I mean, this is more of an epic life story. This is it's more like Lawrence of Arabia than like chase sequence movie. Like, you know, let's just take the last 20 minutes of Beyond Thunderdome and make that the whole movie, which it kind of feels like the Fury Road pitch was. So, you know, I think it's intentional, but if people don't want that, or if, you know, they're not prepared for it, but certainly if they don't want that, if they're like, I'd actually would rather not have anything explained, I'd rather just, you know, have it exist nebulously in my mind, then they're probably going to recoil at this movie and not care for it.
I'm struggling. So what I'm thinking about is who would be a person that for the recommendation algorithm is, do I really think anybody who loves Fury Road should not see this? And accepting all these quibbles we've all had, I think even those of you who are a little cooler than I was perhaps would still say, like, it's fun. It's a good time to see this. And so it seems to me like if you like Fury Road, there's no reason to do it. A lot of the critical discourse has been hung up on, well, now that it's kind of had a rough box office weekend, it's like, it's because it wasn't Charlize Theron. I'm like, I don't think anybody cares that much. And this is tapping into Solo discourse too, where they're like, it wasn't Harrison Ford, so it flopped. I'm like, no, I really think that matters a lot less to people in the modern IP driven age. And if it really comes down to, as has been said by multiple people, if you like the world, if you like the character, then go see this and go see it on a big screen, because it's going to be way better in the theater than in your living room, no matter how big your flat screen is. So I would just keep the recommendation at that, stipulating that it is a very different experience to any of the other Mad Max movies.
Yeah, I think I came in thinking that Fury Road, that Furiosa was going to be sort of like Fury Road, but with intense character development and like time, right? It does add those things, but those come at a cost, right? It comes at the cost of like the pacing being slower, the humor. It's not as funny, right? And there are some visceral sort of thrills that I think that from Fury Road that aren't quite as pronounced here. But even for me, who I'm the coolest of the four of us on this, even though it's my hype draft pick, I definitely think that people who love Fury Road, love the Mad Max movies, should see it. But when I was trying to think of like what would I for the recommendation algorithm, like what movie I would mix, I was like Mad Max meets, and then I said Breaking the Waves, the Lars von Trier movie. That was my that's the best that I could come up with. What did you all have? What did you have? Movies that I was so curious to if anyone had specific titles that they could add to this.
So the thing I haven't been able to get out of my head was, I think, something PT relayed to me about Sean Fennessy's Letterboxd review or something. Like, Sean Fennessy said this is closer to the first Mad Max movie than it is to Fury Road. And that was kind of like echoing in the back of my head as I was watching the movie. And I would agree, but only partially, because I think tone is a thing that people who are reacting poorly to this movie, and I don't mean like Antonio's sort of like politely cool response, like the actual like this was not good response, I think is stemming from a really slight shift in tone that is twofold. On the one hand, it is more serious and less funny because it has actually a lot more, just like it has like and again, I'm getting dangerously close to spoiler mode in what I'm about to say, but like it has a lot more brutality in some ways, like in terms of just what people are doing to each other in this movie. It feels different. And I don't mean that in the slang way of like it hits different. It's it's like you know what I mean? Like it's a different type of violence. And terror that is closer to, if you've seen Mad Max 1, is a little bit closer to what we see there than what we see in the other Mad Max movies. The other thing, too, at the same time, and this is creating a really interesting tonal tension for me, is that you have Chris Hemsworth, as I mentioned earlier, being charismatic and goofy, and like his character is very buffoonish, but also very serious. But I feel like his performance, regardless of whether or not you like it, is contributing a tone that Mad Max movies have not seen before, where it's like he is not taking himself super seriously. Like we're used to the Mad Max villains being more like Immortan Joe than Dementus, and I think so. It's the combination of those two things that I think is making people being like, "What is this movie?" If they're reacting to it negatively.
I like all of that. I think that's a really good point. I think that it was Sean Fennessy reviewing the first Mad Max movie on Letterboxd, saying this is the movie that is the most, like, almost like the most important to watch before Furiosa. I don't know if he said that way, but like it feels the most connected to Furiosa, which I think makes sense for all the reasons that you say. On a second viewing, I went and saw this movie again today. I'm doing my part to help with the box office. Maybe I'm the one that, unlike what Greg said earlier, pushed it up to number one. It is a number one over Garfield now. Could be my $25 to see it in IMAX in the middle of Hollywood. I don't want to. I'm not taking any bets. I'm no guy from Iran. Anyway, I was thinking this time about Hemsworth that he has a lot of Heath Ledger in him in this performance, which, like, it's interesting. I do feel like people are just like, well, he's just being goofy, but like it feels so threatening to me. Like, and I think it's because even without having tied it into that the first time, it has that kind of Heath Ledger's Joker, like I'm kind of playing around and I'm kind of full of myself, but I also like really feel like I just have to hurt people to prove that I'm someone to be, that's worth existing here. So, I guess that's how I would sort of marry that tension, and maybe we have to go into spoiler mode to do that. To what Antonio was saying, it's like this is overinflating Furiosa from both directions. I kind of was thinking it's Fury Road and Lawrence of Arabia, where it's like this long stretched out story in the desert of kind of an outsider, but also that it's going to be pretty long, and at times it's going to be kind of slow, but have some like spectacular moments. So I might say that, but then I also would be like, and then dial it down from like 2 all-timer movies to 1 current exceptional movie, but not like, not in the conversation for some of the best films of all time.
I think we're ready for spoiler mode.
Okay.
But if Greg has one last comment, then I will say that again.
No, it's fine.
After you make your comment. Okay, you're good. I just feel like we've been
dancing.
We've been approaching spoiler mode dangerously so I want to get us in there. And I do feel like I moved a question. This is meta talk now. I moved the why is this doing so poorly at the box office? I moved that to spoiler mode because I feel like our answers will be better if we don't have to worry about spoilers. So if you have not seen Furiosa, Mad Max Saga, and you do not want it spoiled, this is your last warning. Please go see the film, help out the box office, do your due diligence, do your duty, and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation.
Pay for this movie.
Sorry.
Were you going to say pay for this movie and then go see Garfield? Like what?
No, I was going to say pay for this movie so we can get the final Mad Max movie he wants to make.
Oh,
which
yeah.
He said he can only make if this movie makes money. He turns 80 like early next year. He's got to do it now. Can't wait another 10 years.
The tentative title is The Wasteland. Is that right?
Yes. I believe it's the Max backstory before Fury Road. It's what Mad Max was doing leading up to Fury Road, because it's or he had a story for Max afterwards. But when he got to Fury Road, he said, I have 2 movies, Fury Road and The Wasteland. And I also have an entire backstory to Furiosa that I think could be a movie. And he's made Furiosa now, and he wants to do The Wasteland. And again, just based on the actuarial tables, this would be the last one I think he would make. So I hope he can do it, even though this only made $25 million this week. 26.
It went up since then. The last thing I can't remember what the number is though. It's like 32 now, I think. But yeah,
it's the only Mad Max movie to be number 1 at the box office. So there's that.
There you go.
Thanks, Pitch Perfect 2, that took the spot from Fury Road.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So what are our theories? Obviously, like we can't really know what is behind this even lower than people expected. Because I feel like a lot of the buzz going into Furiosa was like, well, don't forget, Fury Road didn't actually make that much money. It could have actually lost money, right? Pitch Perfect came in first, right? All the stuff people were trying to contextualize and set our expectations. And I think even still, it sounds like Furiosa is not doing well. So, like, what is going on? What do we think?
I'll dive in. I think this is a really hard question. And I would say I did not participate in a ton of discourse this weekend, but it did seem like the predominant explanation I saw online is everybody saying, hey, guess what? Film Twitter doesn't actually determine box office, right? Because, and I think that's kind of a shot at Fury Road, that Fury Road has become this darling of like film people, but it was never a box office behemoth, and it wasn't destined to be that. The takes I don't think are right are the ones saying like, and it doesn't even have Charlize Theron in it. With all due respect to Charlize Theron, Hemsworth and Anya Taylor-Joy are such bigger stars at the moment, and I think you would pull in other teenagers, right? Honestly, I had more teenagers in my theater for I Saw the TV Glow than I did for Furiosa. Furiosa, it was all the 40 something couples and mostly single dudes. Shout out to my single one ticket please brothers. I think it wasn't that, and I'm frustrated by that, but I think it comes down to the box office is just down across the board. Nothing's making anything this summer, despite fairly good quality. He says, having skipped the Apes movie still, I'll get there. But like the quality has been pretty good, and just people aren't showing up. People like to stay home. They like to not put up with the other people in the theater. I thought Big Picture had a great point the other day when they talked about how movie theater lobbies are just horror shows now, right? Like walking into an AMC is such an unpleasant experience that you just don't want to go do it, even if you're excited for the movie that you get to on the other side of the lobby. PT, I'm accepting your beloved Draft House. They do a much better lobby experience than AMC. But I think people are out of the habit of going to the movies, and the kind of prequel to some kind of singular experience they had 4 years ago just wasn't going to get them out, as is now clear. But Garfield, man, that cat hates Mondays. Let's get to that.
Yeah. So this is extremely anecdotal and not scientific or empirical at all. But I did see a post today. It was from, a trade outlet like Deadline or Hollywood Reporter. And it was kind of reporting on the poor box office. And I knew I shouldn't do this, but I did it anyway. I'm like, I got to do this for the pod. I looked at the comments. And I saw a few things that all were like both disheartening and interesting. One was tons of people complaining this is not a movie about Mad Max. And they're like, half of those are, we got to have another movie about this Mary Sue, like the like anti-feminist camp. But the other half are just like, why are we calling it like, I like Mad Max. I go to these movies for Mad Max. Why is he not in this movie? Right. In a way that is at best like gender neutral and not sexist. Right. So there's that, which I was like, oh, really? That's really interesting. As much as they tried with the weird subtitle of a Mad Max Saga, that didn't seem to make a difference, right? The other thing that I saw was, well, movies go to streaming so quickly now. Why would I bother? And we saw this with Fall Guy, right? Fall Guy,
3 weeks.
Very cowardly. How long was it, Greg?
3 weeks. It was, 3 weeks in theaters exclusively, and then a $25 purchase, I think. And people didn't go.
So, like, that's really, to me, again, on the one hand, I want people to be able to have choices, right? I'm not anti-choice. I don't want to impose my preferences on everyone else in terms of movie going, but at the same time, economically, I can totally see how they're, the carrot and the stick are totally out of whack, and now people are just like, well, I don't really care. So why wouldn't I just wait until I can see it at home? So yeah, I don't know. and none of those things necessarily have to do with this movie and the quality of this movie. It's terrible.
I did a little.
I mean, I think that the way that franchises often endure, for one, it's by giving something sort of reliable and something that you can and something that you can sort of expect, with a little extra added in the form of like a novel antagonist, or often a raising of stakes, right? As the movies continue on, the series goes on, the big bad gets bigger, badder, whatever. So I think that the move here was both, for a lot of people, thinking that like this was a comparatively like minor entry in the series, right? That 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 it wasn't necessary, that it was like that it's just character development, and that's not really what we watch the Mad Max movies for, right? Now, that generally speaking is like a horrifying stance for me. That being said, um, that being said, like in my Letterboxd review, I had a very long Letterboxd review about this, and because I really wanted to unpack why this movie, which like beat by beat, I was just sort of like, that's cool, that's interesting, but at the end there was something that was just sort of missing for me. There was something that I just wasn't getting from it, and I think at the end, for me, it was just the sort of joy of what Mad Max sort of represents to me. Um, uh, so I think that's why. I mean, I'm not sure why people aren't showing up, because like they don't know that until they come to see it, I guess, right? So, but I think that the framing of the film, as much as I think everyone probably has to admit that Furiosa was the coolest character in Fury Road, um, there are just people who, there wasn't an appetite for, I guess, more mythology about these characters, I guess, right? Or we misjudged it, or we misjudged like what all those Oscars meant to like people, right? Um, uh, like the legend of that movie, after those Oscars, I remember thinking at those Oscars, I was like, is Mad Max going to win Best Director and Best Picture? Right? Is this actually going to happen? And feeling disappointed when it didn't happen, but also feeling like, look what happened though. Like, look how many Oscars this movie won. And so I think to go on to Greg's point about sort of like film Twitter, but also the Academy like doesn't control movie taste, right? And there is often a disconnect between what people actually want to see and what like gets rewarded in these venues. PT, sorry, I think I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, I may have had an internet connection glitch. So two things. One, in response to Jen, and then I want to say another thing in response to you. In response to Jen, I did maybe ill-advisedly go into the Mad Max subreddit to see what's happening there. Generally very positive. But its
own Wasteland, right?
No, well, I mean, yes, it is. But it was a little bit more of a green place in terms of positive reactions for the movie. But in there, and again, this could be some degree of copium. I think we might have talked about this on the Dial of Destiny review. You can hit the sound drop if you want to. But back then there was some hemming and hawing to make sure it could come through. That there was like, I believe our review guest Jim Clements said like that's the only place on the internet where people liked Dial of Destiny, which I think as time has gone on that has shifted. But in any event, there's people that really like it. So maybe this is a coping mechanism for what's happening. They seem to think that there is a sort of semi-organized men's rights, anti-woke push that the subtitle A Mad Max Saga is an insult to men, and that there's some people who are actively being like the Mary Sue, blah, blah, blah. But even the people that are like, well, I don't understand why it doesn't have Mad Max, are those people who are just better at hiding their agenda and are trying to like snake in. Like, I don't know if people should see this because I don't think it's really like about what we really want. It's about this other character, which of course happens to be the woman. So I don't know. Again, don't read the comments, Jen. Thank you for your service, for doing it. But it's awful. It's awful out there.
I really did hover over it to be like, yeah, I got to do it. I got to see. And maybe there's something in here I could share.
Yeah. I think Antonio's point, Greg's point about film Twitter, Antonio's point, extending that to the Academy. I think that's right. I always think back to talking to someone who likes things, but doesn't like thinking about them beyond, enjoying something. Like, they watch movies and TV shows, but they don't like think about the process of making it, or whatever, like all the dumb stuff we get into. And so this was of a time when Mad Men was playing, different Mad story. And I was explaining to them that The Big Bang Theory was watched by like 20 times the number of people that Mad Men was. And they were like, I don't know anybody who watches The Big Bang Theory. Like, everyone I know watches Mad Men. And it was a real, like, no one I know voted for Nixon on the Upper West Side thing, where I feel like a lot of people in and around movies and in around being like hardcore movie lovers are just like, everybody's found Mad Max Fury Road. Everybody loves that movie. Even if it wasn't that successful, Blu-ray, streaming, like, it's everywhere. People love it. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's ever been this franchise that can be, banked on to make $200 or $300 million like very easily. It is kind of a weird world and a weird niche thing from kind of a very strange filmmaker who made one movie between Fury Road and this, and it was also not successful. I also thought it was excellent. We can talk about 3,000 Years of Longing someday if anybody wants to. But they're not all babes and they're not all happy feets for George Miller. So yeah, I think part of it is just that, like, there wasn't the thirst for it that maybe everyone thought it would be. And then you add in, okay, so it's a prequel, it's part of this larger story. Maybe I have to do homework. I don't want to do that, which is not necessarily appealing. So yeah, I think that combined with just Barbenheimer doesn't mean people are going to the movies all the time anymore. It's very unique, specific experiences, and this isn't one of them. Greg.
Well, back to your point when you invited Antonio to go see Fury Road on the big screen with you, I think in March, kind of assuming they would make the big push of putting Fury Road back in, doing the double screenings. Like, what are we doing, Warner Brothers? Like, that would have helped so much. Insane. Because, we've gushed on and on about Phantom Menace. Phantom Menace hit number 2 at the box office. I think one thing that is getting people out to theaters is when they have a bankable, I know what that product is. I like that movie, so I'm going to see it. And so I think if Fury Road had come out in theaters for a week and a half, even do that round of like, hey, Wednesday night, I guess A24 was doing this, right, with Uncut Gems on IMAX, which still did pretty good business, which is insane. But like, one special night, come see Fury Road again. Now instead of like, you could do a double feature of Fury Road, like put Furiosa and then roll right into Fury Road would be incredible, but they're not. They're going to dump this on streaming super fast. And I mean, it goes back to Warner Brothers is being run by a telecommunications company at this point. Is that still true? I don't know, but they're not movie people that really know what they're doing. And I think it was a huge misstep because, if teenagers were bored in late April, they would have grabbed a ticket to see Fury Road, and you would have had a bigger audience and more enthusiasm, reminded people what it's like. And so if Warner Brothers is listening, PT is available to be your marketing consultant. He was planning on it. He had mentally purchased tickets, and yet you let us all down.
I'm still taking Antonio and hopefully Jen to a screening of Fury Road whenever it happens, even if it's just at like the Egyptian or something. They're just doing a one-off thing.
So I want to bring the energy back up. So I've shifted some questions around, and I want us to talk about our favorites, things that we really enjoyed, because I think, regardless of where we landed on the movie as a whole, we all at some point or other in our short take mentioned that there were things about this that we liked. So favorite action scene? Let's give some shout outs.
Okay, I have a favorite. I'll start this one. The moment when Dementus is trying to trick trick the Citadel into thinking that to trick them into opening the gate, and they have and they've put their men in like the Citadel people's rig or whatever, right? But they weren't buying it because like the people on the rig were fine, right? Like no one was getting hurt. So when he betrays like his own men and says like, start killing them. Right? So that
we
they'll
gotta
open
make it
the
look
gate.
real.
We have to make it look real. Like one thing that's sort of interesting about this was that like it's like Fury Road was like bad guys versus good guys, and there's something that was kind of like was easy and visceral about that. Here you have like varying levels of badness, right? And so you have bad guys versus bad guys versus bad guys, and then Furiosa, and then the guy, the good guy, the Jack guy. So I thought that moment was an interesting moment, because Dementus, like you've described him as he presents himself as kind of like this buffoonish, like preening, like, but he's savage, right? And that's cold blooded, and so that was a moment for me that I was like, oh. Right? It makes perfect sense, and it's awful. But I also like the fact that like his follower was like mad, right? Like you saw that the person who had like he was angry that his own men were being betrayed, and so that you can start to see the fractures like in his faction, right? So that to me I thought was a really interesting moment. How about for you all? Favorite moments?
Well, I mean, that moment that you're describing of at the end where the guy with the horns, I forget his name, is mad. That sets up what I mean. I'll take it is the centerpiece action moment, which is the stowaway chapter, which is just that's the Fury Road-esque battle with all the new crazy elements of the parachute, motorcycles, and the guys sort of parasailing behind the bikes and throwing things down, and the new fancy rig, which is technically the old one in the timeline, but whatever, new to us, that they has it's longer, it has more built-in defenses, including the swinging balls in the back. All that I thought was incredible. And I just want to note to the point Antonio was making of that sort of raid on Gastown when they Dementus turns on his own people dressed as the War Boys. That also is one of, I think, the most prominent, but there are many sort of mythological connections there of it's just that's just the Trojan horse move of like, let this in. Oh, whoops, it's filled with all the enemy soldiers. And now we're taking over. And so, I think there's a lot of interesting, I don't want to be like, oh my God, it's so deep, but I think there's a lot of interesting kind of mythological dynamics that are being tapped into, which kind of ties into the fact that like, is any of this really a story that happened any more so than the other Mad Max movies, or is this just the tale the history man tells us based on the stories that Furiosa told him, and it's all this sort of like oral history construct of we're just telling stories about what's happening. So anyway, the stowaway is my favorite action sequence. Greg, what do you have?
Man, you had to introduce yours with the subtitle, because I am not going to say poles of insecurity in a positive light ever. Is that what it was? Poles of
inaccessibility.
Inaccessibility. Oh,
yeah.
What are we doing? But I will take the opening action sequence as a favorite, because I actually, when you said it kind of took you until seeing Anya Taylor-Joy, I would say that like I agree for the second piece, but the opening with Furiosa's mother and a friend initially chasing the raiders who have taken Furiosa, Dementus's men. I thought that was awesome, and that got me really excited right from the get-go. There's a moment in Lord of the Rings The Two Towers where Legolas is standing shooting wargs with his bow, and then he does this weird thing where he suddenly turns into digital Legolas and like flips up on a horse a weird way, and every time I'm like almost, right? Like it's great and it gets a cheer, but like you saw how he just turned into digital Legolas there, right? Like it's not, and I thought this sequence kind of had that same energy, except it was real people on a real motorcycle for different times, and I just thought it was really exciting and a really fun way to start the movie. Even back to then when there's this kind of final confrontation, this weird rock formation that was clearly like geologically formed for a perfect action sequence. It just kind of all fit in that. And it was another one of those moments, and we've alluded to the prequel problem. It's like, yeah, I know this isn't going to work out, and in this construction of a story, like, she's not going to get her back, but yet I found myself like really engaged despite knowing the answer. At a few different action sequences in this. Jen, we've taken almost all of them, so do you want to second a vote or offer another one?
Yeah, so my pick was going to be what PT picked, and that is for a lot of the reasons that he said, but also my favorite part of this movie was Pretoria Jack and Furiosa. Like, and that was actually, not to turn it into a critique, but that was what I wanted to see more of, because that was the part of the movie where I was like, yes, like this, I need to know more. I need to see more of this. Just because I feel like, one, that like his introduction as a character, because it's through that particular the stowaway action sequence, is so good, right? And you immediately, and I didn't think of Tom Burke as an action star necessarily at all. Like, I really enjoyed him in, I think the last thing I saw him in was probably Living, which is the Bill Nighy movie that got a screenplay nomination last year, I want to say, and other things and stuff like that. And so he's usually a much quieter, giving much quieter dramatic performances, right? And so like the fact that like the second he was on the screen, he comes across as like really competent, and like he's caring, and then to pair them together, and again, like, because we know so much about Furiosa as a character, pairing her with another Imperator seems almost like a fool's errand, right? Like on paper, like if you had pitched to me, oh, okay, like she's going to show up and then they're going to try to have her partner with this other random person you don't know, I would be like, well, that doesn't sound like it's going to be good, right? But yeah, I totally bought into it. And I do feel like that just the pure action in that scene to me was the most compelling. Because she's there's, and I think one of the things I love about Fury Road is that the war rig has so many levels, right? And because it's constantly moving, and there's like the undercarriage, and you can go on top of it, and there's like the driver's seat, right? There's all these different areas. It's its own sort of constantly moving set, and so I feel like that scene captured that the most for me, and so I really liked it. But yeah, I just was like, I would like just to see a spin-off movie of the adventure, or a series, I guess it would be, of the adventures of Pretoria Jack and Furiosa.
I want to say, add in for the action scenes, that I also really like that the final quote unquote action scene is a very slow chase of Furiosa in a car driving slowly behind Dementus, and like moving backwards if he comes towards her, like taunting him and teasing him. And like after all these things we've seen across these two movies, I really like that it slowed down there. I didn't get through the whole thing. I got distracted by a basketball game, and then I had to record. But I started watching Fury Road again today. And it was interesting to think how the Praetorian Jack character informs maybe like how Furiosa responds to Max, because Max is such like he's just an outsider, he's a feral, he's a wastelander, whatever, but it's the qualities he starts to demonstrate that reflect Praetorian Jack. Like, not that I ever had a problem buying it, but that was an interesting kind of additional layer to it. I also noted this time seeing Furiosa in the theater how we have two major moments when another character is like, you need to just leave and let me do my thing, and you go and you live your life. And both times she's like, no, like, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back. She comes back for her mom at that aforementioned rock crevice when she gets captured by Dementus's people, and then Jack shoots the green flare to tell her to leave in the air at Bullet Town, and she doesn't go. She comes in with a sniper rifle. Also a great honorable mention action sequence. So that makes it, I felt like then in Fury Road, when one of the wives is run over, falls out, and the pregnant one who falls out and runs, is run over, and the other wives are like, we have to go back for her. And Max is like, no, like she went under the wheel. Like she went under the wheel. That was the first time Furiosa was like, okay, I'm actually going to keep going, and I'm going to go and like prioritize my quest over going back to help. So I think there are interesting ways that some of these things in this movie will, again, I don't think it's fixing any problems in Fury Road. I feel like Fury Road had very few problems, but I think it's adding some depth to some of those moments.
I'm really glad you brought that up because, first of all, I was having the same thought where it was like, because I rewatched Fury Road yesterday, and I feel like it was so interesting rewatching it, having just seen Furiosa, because, as you said, it recontextualizes a lot, and I think a good way. And the thing I'll just add to what you said was, in addition to explaining her reaction, like first she's frosty, but then she starts to recognize qualities in the way Mad Max is sort of being a little bit more heroic, that maybe reminds her of Praetorian Jack. I also thought the fridging of Praetorian Jack is very much like first Mad Max movie, right? Like, and how that actually creates much more of a parallel between Tom Hardy's Mad Max and Charlize Theron's Furiosa in Fury Road, right? And that, like, coming to it with that backstory, it almost makes all of the, because they're, well, as in most Mad Max movies, there's not a lot of dialogue, right? But the little dialogue they do have is about redemption, right? And about how them going back to kind of take over the Citadel. Sorry, I guess I should have also said spoilers for Fury Road, but I suppose that was implied, right? But like their joint decision to go back, right? The reason she grabs his hand and they have that like really, really great predator handshake, is because they get each other because they've been through a similar experience, where they've lost all hope and then can't see it coming back, right, through redemption, a redemptive arc, of like, well, I couldn't save Praetorian Jack before, I couldn't save my wife and kid before, and whatever small child is haunting him in Fury Road, right? And so that they are on the same page because they're the same character in a lot of ways. I don't know, for me it was a lot of value added. That justified it for me, of like, oh, we needed this movie to understand that.
And the third angle on that, and I'll stop talking so much, is that Dementus is the dark mirror version of Max. Like, he's the one who lost his family and felt like he had no hope. Yep. And his way of doing it was, I'm going to try to retain as much power as possible. I will become Dark Dementus when I need to. I will be evil. I will hurt people. I will just like make other people ache because I also ached. And on the flip side is Max, who like kind of goes off and does his own thing and just survives, but like seems to step in whenever he's like, okay, well, this person's more of a jerk than this person, so I'm going to protect these people who are less jerks. And you know, that's the sort of motivation, is I will try. I can't fix what happened before, but I'll try to help people when I can. Whereas Dementus is I'll try to hurt people when I can.
Antonio or Greg, do you want to jump in with your favorite non-action scene?
I agree with you that the scenes with Praetorian Jack and Furiosa together were my favorite scenes, partly because so much of the movie is Furiosa isolated, both isolated from anyone who cares about her, but also isolated in as much as like she, for functional reasons, like can't talk, right? During the period of time when she's like pretending to be a man, right? So it was kind of nice to see a different shade of that character and not her just sort of like clenching her teeth or suffering some awful, awful thing, right? So yeah, I liked that dynamic a lot. There was, in fact, so much so that even when the car was dragging Praetorian Jack, I was like, maybe he's alive. Like maybe he can make it through this, right? I'm not sure. Like the dogs are following. I don't know. You know. But then when Chris Hemsworth, Dementus, when it shows how much time had passed, I was like, he's probably dead. So yeah, there
is no hope. There is no hope.
No. There is no hope. How about you, Greg?
I mean, I think the Jack Furiosa dynamic is just so perfect. That's the correct answer, and so I'll co-sign both of your emotions on that. So I'll throw in a different one, which is maybe silly, but that's the mood I'm in. I really loved the scene in the garage where they're like establishing where all these ridiculous creations come from, right? It's like every gang we've seen has had these kind of cool chop shop creations that are like totally original and wild. And it's like we've never had experience in this franchise. Like, oh, here are the dudes who just hang out in a garage and come up with stuff and put this together. And then there's that really good gag later where the guy's like, oh, I've got a beauty of a car for you. Like, she's so fast. Like, and there's a missing wheel. And it's just like, it's this piece of the mythology that I hadn't realized we were missing of like, oh yeah, there are just a bunch of weirdos who live in a garage and soup up. Now, that being said, it did remind me slightly of the Mario Brothers movie where like, for some reason, the gorillas are like the cart people in Mario.
In charge of Mario Kart?
In mythology. So it had like resonance with that in a kind of funny way. But I liked that because then you think about the guys who and the way they came up with the big spinny thing for the back of the war rig. It's like, yeah, like if you're just a weirdo living in a garage trying to figure out what to do to make this crazy, it was just a lot of fun. So that's my nominee as a silly one.
Is that called is it the Boomy Knocker?
I believe it's the Boomy Knocker.
The Boomy Knocker. Yeah.
Okay. That was great.
Greg, I'm glad you brought up Super Mario because that's actually relevant. The guy who's like, I've got a great car for you, and then it's like crap, is apparently a character from the Mad Max video game. He's the guy who gets you vehicles in the Mad Max video game, and the first one you get is a really crappy one like that. And so it's like he's the guy that you can't trust. He's called like the chum digger or something, a great Wasteland name. It's chum something, I know that. And so yeah, that's a video game connection. I just want to throw out, it's not even really a scene, it's a transition, but the time that we shift, I guess we don't actually shift the actresses yet, but it's after she's cut, young Furiosa has cut her hair off because Rictus, who I sort of appreciate, they took time in this movie to be like, this guy's terrible. Like, you may have thought he was funny in Fury Road, but actually, like, he's as much, if not more, of a monster as everybody else. So after he comes to do whatever creepy thing he wants to do, and she runs away, and he's stuck holding the wig, and then he kind of throws it away behind his back when his brother comes up. The time passing transition of the green branch growing out of the wall around the wig, I thought was incredible. I was quietly to myself hooting and hollering in my seat, of just like, yes, beautiful, lovely. And I was like, great, now we're going to see Anya Taylor-Joy. And then instead we get one more sequence with Alila Brown, I think, or Alila Brown. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. But I think that's the sequence where they CGI'd her face to look like Anya Taylor-Joy. Because when they had that one sequence, they changed her face to give her Anya Taylor-Joy's eyes. So the aging looked more accurate, I guess.
I heard that too. And I was like, really? Like, we didn't need to do that. No one's asking for that. Literally no one is asking for that. Anyway, my favorite non-action scene, maybe this is obvious, and I guess you could argue this is still an action scene, but everything really slows down to a standstill, is the final scene between Furiosa and Dementus. And I feel like for two reasons. One is it does so much to confirm how complex a character Dementus is, because of this, like we've been saying for a while, like he seems like he's a total idiot, really bad at his job. He rolls up to the Citadel being like, hi everybody, like I'm in charge now, and having no idea like what he's getting into, which I thought was very funny. But at the same time, like, because of the teddy bear and his mention of the like he lost his family as well, right? Like that already is doing a lot. But this final scene where he's actually explicitly talking about it, I thought was really well written. And did so much to kind of like justify why this movie had to be about Furiosa and him. You know what I mean? Because like up until that point, I was sort of like, well, I'm having fun watching Chris Hemsworth do his thing, but like, you know, why this character? And like a lot of people have said actually that he, in a lot of ways, because he's doing so much talking and Anya Taylor-Joy is doing so little, like she has, I think, about 115 lines in the whole movie. There's some number floating around that's like absurdly low that's counting her lines. Because of that, a lot of people are saying that he like steals the movie. I don't agree with that, but he does take up a lot of space in the movie. And I think that final scene is what really, to me, cinches it so that like I'm like, yes, this was the right choice. The way that he is her foil psychologically and sort of saying like, you know, you're going to be just like me, right? And presenting that path, that choice to her, right? Like she could either be more like Mad Max or she could be more like Dementus, right? She's no Mad Max at that point, but like I think for us, that's sort of the two. That's the fork in the road that I thought was really powerful, right? And that she's so angry with him, and he's just kind of like he doesn't actually really care if he's going to die. It seems like there's a lot of nihilism to his character that I think makes him very interesting. Again, he's like, there's no hope. He's the hope, the hopelessness, and she's thought there was hope. She had enough hubris to think there was hope that she could get back to the green place, right? I really liked their exchange, and I thought the level of acting from Chris Hemsworth, I think if people are like, oh, he's just being goofy, I feel like they're not paying attention during that scene.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with the Dementus's lines and those last scenes that he has some interesting things to say and some surprising things to say at the end there, right? That for me to chew on. But one thing that I wanted to bring up about that exchange though is that and this goes with the point that Anya Taylor-Joy that the Furiosa doesn't have many lines throughout this movie. If this movie is functioning as kind of like as an extended character study of her, right? And through the course of this movie, we are put through the ringer and watching like we've mentioned the thrill, like Greg's that opening sequence. I agree, it was absolutely thrilling, but I can't separate it from how that from how that ends with this awful image of like her mother strung up being tortured, and like I'm not exactly sure what was the death blow, but like no answer to that question is good, right? And just like the horror of like this little child watching, that's the moment where I was just like, uh-oh. Right? Like this is not gonna be an easy like watch. Like I'm and then PT, you brought up the scene with Rictus where like I was like, am I about to watch her be like assaulted, like sexually assaulted by this guy, right? Like that's all of that is built into this movie and built into this suffering. And so but she doesn't get to talk, right, through the course of it, and doesn't get to say anything. And part of the relief of having Praetorian Jack was that here's just like a human being acting like a human being with her. And like you want there to be, I mean, for me, I wanted like more in that moment, but not just more in terms of time, but more in terms of like something like something being said, or her saying something for me to understand how she is processing all of this beyond just like, I want to kill Dementus, I want to destroy Dementus, right? And so as much as I enjoyed Dementus's lines and found them like fascinating and they deepen sort of his character, Furiosa's lines aren't great, right? In that moment, like they're exactly what you would expect her to say. I want them back, right? This very visceral, but like that's the same Furiosa. Those are the same lines that she could have said at the very beginning of the movie, right? I want my mother back. I want my life back. I want all of this back, right? And so, um, so I think that I have mixed feelings about the ending because of that, um, and I don't know that there was much that at that point in the movie that she could have said to make me think like, okay, like, all right, I get I've watched this like really painful saga, like to get to this moment, but it wasn't, but it felt unbalanced, right? And that even though she ultimately prevails, right? I still had this sort of like the images that remain in my head at the end of that movie weren't like joyous ones. They were the really like awful ones. They're the mother and strung up on the rock, and I just couldn't get it out of my head.
And I mean, I will say, Mother Strung Up on the Rock, seen in the reflection of Furiosa's eye, which that's the one that gets me.
Yeah.
The thing, and it's interesting because I know you sort of said that like there's no joy. Is that like this is sort of a prequel problem because the joy is in the next movie, which is the last movie, and in a way, this is all sort of setting up for this is how this character got to the point of trying this thing that like we saw when we went and saw Fury Road. It was just like, yeah, this character is doing this thing, okay, and now we're sort of seeing, oh, how much did she have to go through to get to that point, which is again maybe like maybe I didn't need that explanation, maybe we didn't have to have that backstory. But I will say, thinking about her lines in that last scene, I was sort of struck watching it that it there's something so I mean, I don't want to say regressing because that's maybe going too far, but there's something so like unrealistic. And she finally gets this guy cornered, and she's like, "Bring back my mom and bring back my childhood." And it's like, well, that's like he clearly can't do that, and like that's an illogical request. Like it's not it didn't even get to sort of like, and I want you to like acknowledge that you took this from me, but like she just keeps saying, "Give it back to me," like make it happen again, which like kind of seems, I won't say I thought of this in the moment, but in terms of what you were just saying, that like that's like her through all of the years expressing this thing that she was like holding on to, that like when you're 6 or 7, however old she's supposed to be, when the story starts, you could see a child being like, well, give me this thing back that cannot be given back. And that like she needs to release that, and she needs to actually sort of yell and shout and say this sort of obvious thing, and not really go further than that, to then have the ability. And it's weird for the context of this movie because it's like in the final maybe 90 seconds start to pivot to, okay, so like I can't actually get those things back. Killing this person's not going to necessarily help me. Who is it that I can save? Who is it that I can do something for? So, suddenly like future people won't have to have this thing that I have, which opens the door to the wives and growing the tree, but the tree really being for the wives, because that's who she can save. She can't grow fruit for herself anymore. She can pass it on to younger people and then their children. And that's to try to like escape and go to the green place. But again, that's kind of setting up like another movie, and it isn't like necessarily within the story. So I can see watching it and just being like, well, that was a bummer, and not really feeling a lot of hope beyond those little flashes of the the positive endings for people in Fury Road, or bad endings, I guess.
It's also what happens in between the two movies, right? Because I think what Antonio is calling for is the conversation that logically would have between Furiosa and the wives, right? To be like, let me tell you about where I'm from. Let me tell you what happened to me. And then right after that, right, we would get, as she's planting the peach pit, right? Like that's the time when she would be like giving us the interiority that I think you think is lacking. Which I totally get. Like I think if you were to say I don't hear enough from Furiosa. I don't have enough access to her interiority in this movie. I can't argue with that necessarily, right? Because I think a lot of it's just told through her glaring and like and the action. So
my only pushback on the lack of interiority is the whole movie is her story, because it's what she whispered to the history man. And so
sure.
The angles that we see of everything are, and including the actions of other people, are technically her version of the story. But maybe that's cold comfort.
Call me Furiosa, right? A very Moby Dick answer. I like that one.
Well done. That makes up for my missing out on my T.S. Eliot joke earlier. So I guess maybe then actually the next question I have on here probably is the logical place to go, because we're sort of already talking about it, but I wanted to kind of get everyone's thoughts about, why do you feel like George Miller chose to tell this from start to finish? So is there a benefit to start, because this is my low-key way of being like, why doesn't Anya Taylor-Joy show up until an hour into the movie? Okay, that's my beef. I'm like, why aren't we telling the first act through flashbacks? Why isn't it just shorter? Right? That's kind of my main criticism, or the thing that didn't really work for me. So like, talk me into it. Like, is there a distinct benefit to telling it from start to finish in this linear way? Or like, what difference does it make telling it this way versus telling it maybe through more flashbacks of her childhood?
I'll jump in on this one. So I think what it comes down to me, and this goes back to PT's comparison to Lawrence of Arabia. I think that George Miller primarily had like biblical epic ideas of what this story could be, and it's no mistake that the first image is a child picking a fruit in an Edenic location, right? And it all just launches from there. And so I think it's this kind of old-fashioned filmmaking. I mean, now I'm wishing when Antonio asked the question, I'd said that it was Fury Road mixed with It's a Wonderful Life. But like, I think the like long stretch of a life is what he's fixated on as his central idea, like what turns a person into who they are. And I completely agree that, like, you know, get your movie star on screen as fast as possible. I love Anya Taylor-Joy. You know, she is what made Dune 2. Those 2 seconds of glaring just wiped everybody else's performance out of it. But I think instead he wanted to do something a little more old-fashioned. I'm thinking Lawrence of Arabia, 10 Commandments, where you really start at the beginning of somebody's life and track forward in a kind of complete story way. So I love that. And the other comparison I'll make, just because I am who I am, is it feels like Dickens to me, right? Yeah, again, Dickens. That's what Furiosa is. But like that kind of completeness of let's go a really long time and tell that, I think was his central goal. And I assume partially in response to like, I haven't gotten to do this in this world yet. It's always been 48 crazy hours, that one crazy weekend where we went to Thunderdome. And so instead we get to do this kind of really grand history. And I still find myself craving a little bit of that for the world. We keep getting kind of narration overviews of like how the world fell apart so quickly. I did appreciate on Big Picture, they posited that the rest of the world is fine, and this is just Australia, went a little loopy.
Yeah.
So, you know, I do think it worked for me because those sensibilities are something I really like, is that let's tell a story from start to finish. Let's tell a whole life.
Yeah, I like that. And I think because it's so different than the other Mad Max movies, like, to then start to fold in a flashback structure to a narrative that's over many years, I feel like maybe it was like, well, that's going even further afield from what we're used to. So let's just sort of tell this story. But it is more, it's almost like a biopic of like, here's the rise, the fall and the further fall of Furiosa over a long stretch of time. And so I kind of feel like, yeah, and maybe this is my bias on it, if this movie started and we either at Anya Taylor-Joy, or even if it started like at the Citadel when there's the first Morton Joe Dementus sort of standoff, and then we got like seated flashbacks, I feel like the second flashback I'd be like, just show me the thing. I don't want to do like 4 or 5 like snippets of this and then you show me what really happened in the, you know, by the middle of Act 3. Like, let's just give it now. And so maybe that was part of the thinking too, is that flashbacks have gotten a little played out. So yeah, I liked it that way. I also wonder if there is a degree to which it's like, well, we've already had to recast this very popular character. If we spend an hour with like a young child actress, then we switch over to the, you know, new grown-up actor, it won't feel as weird as we're basically seeing a similar aged person or only slightly younger, but we didn't get the original
until we go back to the original actress at the end.
Yes.
And then show scenes from the other movie.
Yeah, which is fine.
Wait,
it's not fine, BT.
I have a question on that.
Sorry.
So the scene where she is walking to the rig and it's clearly like the moment the wives are climbing, was that Charlize? Because podcasts have told me that was Charlize, and I thought that was Anya Taylor-Joy.
Charlize is credited because she's in those scenes from Fury Road. I don't think that it's actually. I think they would have shown Charlize in that setup scene. I think they intentionally obscure her face.
Or you mostly just see the back of her, right?
Yeah.
I would have thought I didn't look into this, so I don't know how helpful this is. But to me, it looked like a body double for Charlize because she does seem taller than
That's
Anya
possible.
Taylor-Joy. So maybe it's the AI smoothing of the two of them together, so that's transition. I don't know. Who knows?
Well, I mean, I think we said this off mic, but there is a Mad Max cameo in this movie who is not Tom Hardy, but is Tom Hardy's stunt double from Fury Road. So if they brought in Charlize's stunt double from Fury Road to be her in that scene, I think that would make sense. In the way that I think the movie, almost implies that like she gets back from killing Dementus, and that it's just like however long it takes for a peach to grow, we hit the road. But like another like 5+ years probably go by for that to occur, and that tree is pretty big. So there is another long stretch of time. It would make sense that it's no longer Anya Taylor-Joy's Furiosa, but is Charlize's. Even though I think it's Anya Taylor-Joy bringing the peach to them. So
right. I don't know. I just don't get why we make such a big deal of being like, this is a different movie. It's a different type of movie. Don't compare it. And then you literally compare it at the end.
I mean,
don't show me the other movie.
Right. Especially
and then I won't have those thoughts.
A weird, like, desaturated / non-color graded version of the movie. Like, it isn't the primed up, like, actual theatrical version. It almost looks like what the dailies look like. Like, it's just, like, regular looking. And the big issue is like, and Greg, maybe this is space for you to try to make the case that Furiosa is actually the superior movie, or at least you had a better time with it. But there is an issue of like, why are you reminding me about the better movie at the end of this movie? Like, why are you doing that? But to give them, again, like to be a little bit gracious, I guess, with it, is that like, it's because that is the story. The story continues into that. And so you're getting these like flashes. And I also, having rewatched all of these now, I'm more so than ever invested in the idea of these Mad Max movies as oral history that's just happened to have been filmed. And so it's like someone is telling the story of Furiosa, and then it's like, and you know what happens, like, and then they leave, and then she leaves, and then the other people chase her, and this guy flips over and dies, and that guy flips over and dies, and then they come back, and now they're here, and that's why I'm telling you the story. Is the Green Place Citadel, founded, whatever AD or after Joe, one after Joe is the it's the time.
That also explains. Oh yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I want to introduce long take review rewind. So if we play back the tape on this question to our Monkey Man review, so here is Jen complaining in Monkey Man that the structure used flashbacks, as I recall, right? Now, Monkey Man did how PT just described it, which is they give you those little hints, and then right before the third act, they're like, here's the complete story as a part of that. And so not actually trying to call you out, Jen, you're allowed to like change your opinions, and it's very different and so on. But like, I would say I much preferred the straight chronological here to Monkey Man, even though my hype draft demands I say Monkey Man is a better movie, even though I don't think my Letterboxd reviews support that.
Okay, so first of all, when I suggested that maybe some flashbacks would be helpful, I did not mean the way that they are executed in Monkey Man. I think there are many ways to do flashbacks, everybody. Like, there isn't just... and actually, I think my big beef with, if I remember, I don't know, you can make that weird noise again. That was not a recording, folks. That was actually Greg's voice making that noise. If I remember correctly, my complaint was that it was repetitive, or at least that was part of the complaint. I think that the use of flashbacks, because we kept seeing the same thing over and over again in bits and pieces, right? So I definitely don't think that would work here for all the reasons everyone else just said. But like, maybe I mean it in a chunkier way, like give us Anya Taylor-Joy first for like the big bang opening action scene, then rewind to her younger version to be like, okay, let's, and not to do the freeze frame. Well, how did I get here?
Yeah,
And then
3 weeks earlier.
I don't mean that either. But to sort of be like, okay, we've got you on the hook for the present timeline, because I do consider Anya Taylor-Joy the present timeline, right? Like, because it's her battle against Dementus, right? And the first act to me is more context through which to understand that, right? And I think if we did a longer scene, a longer flashback after an opening scene, I don't know, that movie sounds good to me.
Would you shorten the young Furiosa section then?
I would.
Yeah.
So I think we don't need as much time with her in a cage. I think actually those are the scenes that I would say serve Dementus as a character more than Furiosa. Because we're sort of learning about him as a leader and stuff like that. It doesn't, because she's not really doing much. Like, because I totally agree. The opening scene with her, there are two things I loved about the young Furiosa phase: the opening scene with her and how she's biting the gas tubes, and incredible. And then like it's this crazy like relay race where they're abandoning parts of a bike or like getting a new bike, and like it's this whole. I loved all of that. And I feel like seeing her as a really scrappy, resourceful young person to indicate that, yes, she comes from this green place, but she has not been brought up in a sheltered way. You know what I mean? I thought was very powerful. Like, so seeing her at the age of 7 or 8 or whatever it is, right, doing all those things was incredible. And then the other scene I really liked was the one that PT alluded to earlier, where she's chopping off her hair to make the fake wig so that she can have an escape plan. All that stuff I loved, and I wouldn't trade those things. But there's a kind of saggy bit in the middle where she's just kind of like touring around with Dementus that I don't need.
For the record, to close the Monkey Man loop, in Jen's comments defense, Monkey Man does benefit from getting Dev Patel on screen very quickly in a way that this would exactly benefit from getting Anya Taylor-Joy. So PT, make your real point, please.
Well, I mean, first of all, I feel like we are disrespecting Alila Brown, who does an excellent job.
She's really good. She's amazing, but she's a child.
Sure. But, I mean, I guess it's just that it is a different movie that like is not interested in a present time. Like it is a constantly moving forward movie. So I think that it would almost position the Anya Taylor-Joy sections as being more primary than the story wants to have it. And I also think that those moments where you're like, well, what's happening with Furiosa is it's Furiosa observing the mechanics, the interpersonal dynamics, the trade negotiations of like Dementus being like, I'm gonna take over. Well, first it's that they find the war boy and they hear about the Citadel, which has them stop looking for where her family's from because they think that's the green place. They think, oh, that must be it, which in the end of Fury Road it is. But they go there and then that becomes, oh, well, this guy, beat us in that standoff. Let's go take over Gastown. And then that has, that whole fun sequence. And so it's sort of her, she is passive in those moments. Like she's just sort of hanging out and like seeing what's happening. But we're getting world building like as like in the story, and also theoretically, like she's starting to see what are the weaknesses of all these guys that are trying to vie for power and set things up. And I think that again, maybe it isn't like super spelled out in a movie that could have more things. Not necessarily more exposition, but maybe it's a little too much lean on implication, but it feels like if the story is ultimately about like a group of women being like, let's try to leave and find a better way. Jack says, this is it. Like all you have are these 3 places. That's it for civilization. There's nothing else. And she knows the secret extra place. And the other, the extra option. And it's also like only the women that try to do that. And the men are stuck in this triangle. So, I think that seeing that develop is helpful, even if it's not a lot of active engagement and active choices from the character of Furiosa. I think it does affect her. And cool scenes. Like there's cool stuff happening. You got a witness.
Yes.
The war boy jumps from really high. I really like the I forget his name is Smeg. I forget the like term for him, but the guy that just acts out whatever Dementus says, and he like gets all the bikers. He does the like rev vroom vroom.
He's the hype man.
He is the hype man. And then whenever it's like, oh, like you're starving, he's like, oh, I'm starving. Like he just does like a pantomime to it. That's great. And he makes it all the way to the end of the movie. Technically, I think he gets away because Furiosa lets him go. He's the decoy.
All right, so I do want to move us into Rhetorical Situation because we're not going to be there long because I think we've already touched on a bunch of things. But was there anything any other things that we want to talk about? Okay, let's do it. So, the Rhetorical Situation, a segment in which we look at the film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts, and we're all here, magically, are writing professors. So we like to have the section dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. In the teaching of writing specifically, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. For me, the big one that I thought of is the prequel factor, which we've already alluded to a couple times. But I'll just open it up. What do you want to talk about in terms of how the fact that this is a prequel or its place in the franchise as a story, its positioning, how is that impacting the way that we're interpreting it?
I mean, I think we've already talked about the fact that the prequel splices in scenes from the next movie, which is really unusual. Like you might get like little hints of something, you get little teasers about but like to actually have that much of it to finish off the arc, I think to PT's point, it does sort of complete the story and allow us to get to where she actually does get like a win that matters. And like it's not going to happen in the context of the Furiosas like the main story, because the death of Dementus feels hollow, and that's part of the point, right? Of like his monologue, and what he's sort of saying is that like I die, whether I die or not, you're already dead, right? And so the it is so on the one hand, I agree with you, Jen, that it was like this sort of odd choice, and that it is begging this sort of like comparison of these two films when Furiosa seems to be demanding to be looked at under different terms and exists in a slightly different genre than Fury Road. But I do feel like when I revisit this movie, I want to revisit them as a pairing. I want to watch Furiosa leading into Fury Road. And actually, when I went home, I actually did. I didn't watch all of Fury Road, but because my reaction to Furiosa was so different, I wanted to see like what was so different. Like what can I attribute that to? And then I started to watch, and then realized like my entire attitude about the movie was just very different, right? So it does enable like them together is an interesting pairing, right? Very different movies, but there's a lot there's some intricate like connections that both in terms of like the character development and also like the moving of the mythology. How about you all? What do you all think about it as a prequel?
I'll jump in and just note, as we've talked more and more about how the credits show that the Fury Road scenes, for some reason in my head, I've transposed the League of Their Own credits into this and assume it's scenes from Fury Road set to Madonna's This Used to Be My Playground, which continues to amuse me in my head as like an image of what this could be. So your move, George Miller, let's get it for the digital release. Let's put that on. I think the other thing to note about the prequel task is it does reduce the stakes just off the bat, right? Like when you see an action sequence coming up between Furiosa and, one of the Lords of the Citadel, you're like, wait, nope, he's in the next movie, so he's going to be fine. And so I think there's that kind of surface level that we all just kind of accept. And some critics have suggested this is why nobody wanted to see Furiosa, because we know that she's fine. But like the majority of movies you go to, you are pretty sure the protagonist is going to make it out alive. So I don't really buy that so much for Furiosa, except for the fact that her big emotional catharsis, we know is in the next movie. And I think that can make this feel a bit unsatisfying. And, I'm not a fancy Letterboxd member who can change out the posters, but I was noticing there is a poster you can choose for Fury Road that a lot of people do, which is just that moment of Charlize just on her knees in the desert. And like, that is such, like, you see that poster and you're like, yeah, that's like the heart, the beating, gaping wound of the film. And it's so wonderful in context. And it's like, remembering that just makes everything here feel just slightly emptier, because we can't have that. One of the problems, it seems so dumb, but like Solo is the obvious comparison point, at least from my life. And one of the problems in Solo is Han Solo has his revelation that like, I am a good guy, I will return. And you're like, and then he does that 20 years later and it's a surprise to him. Like, Solo's a failure of a movie, and I'm not taking questions at this time. So I find that is probably the greatest degree to which this being a prequel robs this experience.
Jen, what do you think? I feel like you always have to go last. So what do you think?
I'm going to riff on the Solo idea a little bit more. Thanks, Greg. So for me, the measure, because I feel like, okay, let me back up for a second. So the interesting criticism that I kept seeing in written reviews, in podcasts, like everywhere, was this is great for a prequel, right? Or this is one of the best prequels I've ever seen, with the implicit subtext of like prequels generally are terrible, right? So while I was watching, having that in mind already, as I was watching this movie, I was kind of my prequel-y radar was very sensitive. And what's interesting is that it actually masks that it's a prequel for most of the movie. But there are 2 or 3 key moments where it like lets go of that and is just like, here's the prequel action you wanted, right? The biggest one I think is how she lost her arm, right? Because when you see the arm, well, first of all, when Dementus very graciously is like, hey, like, not that arm, take the bad, like, hang up, string her up by the bad arm, right? Then you're like, oh, okay, clearly I know what's gonna happen now. But there's one shot of like just her arm hanging. And that is the most prequel-y thing in this movie, I think, to me, right? And there's a couple other moments, right? Like when, there is a moment where she quote unquote transforms into the Charlize Theron Furiosa, right? Where she's dramatically, G.I. Jane style, like shaving her head, right? And sorry, I got to make more on my brain from Can. And like she, you know what I mean? Like there, and then and the smearing of the Imperator makeup on her, the top of her face. Like there's a lot of moments that actually are kind of like, see, we're doing the prequel thing. But there's just so much other stuff going on that I feel like it's not as noticeable. And so that's, to me, is because I kept being like, why are people saying like this is the best prequel I've ever seen, or like this is great for a prequel, or what, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's why, right? Because it still needs to do those prequel moments, but they're, unlike Solo, it's not as pointy in terms of like, hey, over here, look at what we're doing. We're gonna pause for a long time so you can soak in why Han Solo's name is Solo, right? Like, in a way that makes no sense. So yeah, that's I don't know. That's sort of where I'm at. It's like it's an interesting prequel experiment. Yeah. What does everyone else think?
Where he got his name in Solo was the pitch that got Bob Iger to agree to make the movie. That's how off they were. I will say I like Greg being like, well, Solo, of course, the only Star Wars prequel I can think of, after he's logged The Phantom Menace 20 times already this year. But
it's the character origin.
It is.
Right. That's why he's bringing it up.
No, it's right. It's the right.
It's a good comp.
I do think it's the right comp. And I do think that, Jen, what you're saying is right, is that it does sort of sidestep a lot of those things. Like, she does end up, she's wearing the sort of olive green top, and she's got the shave. We see her shave her head, And I guess we see her put on the grease, but like we see that everyone's putting on the grease like that, like the top half, which I guess someone can argue whether that makes it less unique and cool if suddenly like a bunch of people do it. But
wait, I thought it was only. Isn't it only Tom Burke who also has it?
There's a couple other people who I think also are in the background have it.
Oh,
like when you first meet Morton Joe and he's on the balcony, there's two guys with it up there.
Oh, so I inferred that if you were an Imperator, if you had that position, it was like a title thing.
Mm-hmm. Maybe,
but I don't know. I'm not really basing that on much other than.
Although he's a Praetorian when we first see him, but technically he's not an Imperator. And I'm sure someone who knows a lot about Rome would be able to tell us the distinction between those two. Okay, sadly,
nope.
Nope. No one here. I was hoping someone would take the bait because I don't know what this means. But yeah, I mean, I guess the fact it's so different, the fact it's not trying to be a similar kind of movie, I think, like, for the most part, helps it not feel just like, yep, here's just like another story. The fact it's gone in such a different direction. I do think that it's fair that there are people who don't like watching something saying, well, I know I'm supposed to connect this to something later, or I know, like folks are saying here, we don't have the level of emotional catharsis, the level of sort of win for our main character because we're supposed to know that's coming later. I guess all I can say is the happiest person at Antonio screening was the one person who watched nothing of Fury Road. So I guess there is something to the fact that, like, you can watch this and as a story in and of itself be like, yeah, she got that guy and she either killed him or she's got a tree growing out of his crotch. Like, I don't know. Like, you know, good for her. She's moving forward. She finally found something to do with that peach pit that she's able to hide in her hair during these extended crazy action sequences. So, you know, good, like, story closed. Like, what a great ending, even if you don't know where we're supposed to go next.
So I did Google Praetorian Guard. So apparently Imperator is one of many titles if you are a Praetorian Guard. So Praetorian is like a broader umbrella term and is not a competing title.
Interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get promoted from Praetorian to Imperator necessarily.
It sort of looks like, because it's like and again, this is from Wikipedia, which is always great, right? But it has Emperor at the top and then two columns of like random, like Caesar, Imperator, you know, I don't know. So again, I'm not reading it carefully, so I could be totally wrong, but that's what it seems to be. And this is the Wikipedia article is Praetorian Guard, and then it has all these things listed under it. So.
Well, the box office says we probably won't do Furiosa with friends, but if we do, any listener who's got a ancient Roman history and mythology concentration, hit us up, because I think we need to talk to them about this movie.
The nuances of the titles.
Yeah. Well, but also there's lots of mythological elements mixed in that I'm sure I'm not getting beyond just the Trojan horse and the apple from Eden.
Just because we mentioned it a second ago and we didn't talk about it earlier. What do we, and I assume it's PT put a question in here about unreliable narration because you keep bringing it up. But like, what do we think happened at the end? And why is the ending structured as, well, it could have been this, it could have been that, she could have just killed him, or like it maybe, but yeah. And there's this weird insistence of like, I heard it from Furiosa herself, the whispers of whatever the words that Furiosa whispered in my ear, I think is what Truman says. But like, why structure the ending that way as a series of possibilities as opposed to just showing it to us?
To me, that ties more into the earlier Mad Max movies, because both Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome are bookended as these are the stories being told by the child characters in the movie after they've grown up, and they're telling you the legacy, the legend of Max in their lives and in their world. And so this is someone saying, you know, here's the legend of Furiosa within their world. And again, like, I guess we're projecting forward that this isn't being told because it ends right at the start, you know, at least that last final the wives are being put into the truck. That's during Fury Road. So this is presumably a history man from the future after they've taken over the Citadel, after they've established whatever society they're going to have. And so it's like, oh, like I took it as like, this isn't the guy we've been seeing through the movie who's history man. This is someone down the line who's like old age Furiosa, pulled me close to her and whispered, this is the real version of the story, which is of course the most fantastical and the most sort of myth making version of it. So, but yeah, I just think that it's setting up, like it's a type of storytelling that George Miller likes to do in these movies. I think it's also doing a solid of being like, Furiosa is a character in that new world on the level of Max that we've been getting in these other worlds in the earlier Mad Max movies.
I like it.
Well, first of all, Professor Sobchak, I'm the one who put that in the document, and literally every time I put something in the document, you credit PT. So I'm going to stop putting things in the document and inflating his grade. So just for the record, that was my question. So, and this was inspired by some earlier comments because I had the pleasure of going to see I Saw the TV Glow, and as I alluded to earlier, it was full of teenagers and college kids. And I got to the urinals after. Yes, this is a men's group story. And two of the college bros who had been in my row, they were like, man, what was that, man? And he's like, bro, I had no clue what was going on. Sometimes these indie movies just indie movie too hard. And it cracked me up because that's like an incredible reaction. And it's much more at play in I Saw the TV Glow. We won't spoil that here for people. If you haven't seen it, you should go see it. It's incredible. Or
go listen to our episode.
Well, one and then the other.
Yeah.
But what it struck me as is I think there's a type of literary film culture person who has come to really revel in ambiguity and unreliability. And the general public is not there yet. And I see this whenever I teach something that's ambiguous. And I don't teach literature often, but what I wanted to do, but again, I was in the men's room at a urinal, is just be like, hold on a second. Now, think about how the director could have made it very clear, and they chose not to. Unpack that, right? Because that's the kind of leap I think students often struggle with. And I hope it's clear I'm not making fun of this kind of reaction. It's perfectly valid. And I think that's the question that people often aren't asking when there's something that challenges them, right? When they're, now I'm just doing greatest hits from the last 3 long takes that I got to listen to but not be on. But like in Challengers, when people are like, it's hard that it bounces back and forth, you have to be like, yes, but why, right? Like, why is that the choice instead of just like your knee jerk, I didn't like the effort I had to put into this. So I feel like there's this way in which, modern filmmakers and storytellers more widely are really leaning into ambiguity and unreliability. And so PT's answer really fits with this franchise. Absolutely. But I would say we're seeing this turn just at this moment where there's like much and much less objective truth in the world. And it's like, oh, you want to play with not being able to locate the truth of a matter? Like, let me really tell you that. And to PT's point, inside the franchise, like it, the ending you choose is the one that helps you tell the better story for propaganda or against Furiosa or whatever, right? Like with the right audience, it's better to say like, he said to shoot me in the back of the head and she turned to the front. And with a different one, it's like, oh, she made a tree grow out of his crotch, yo, it was awesome. And like whatever the answer is can really suit the rhetorical purpose. So that's why I snuck this question down here, because I think it is very much a kind of modern filmmaking tactic. End monologue. Apologies.
No, I love that. Also, that conversation doesn't sound real. I'm not saying it's not real. I'm just saying it's one of those things where it's like, I can't believe someone actually said that. It's great. Yeah, no, I really like that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Even if you're low key calling me out as basic based on my I Saw the TV Glow reaction,
No.
That's how I'm taking this as a personal attack. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But yes, I like putting it in that larger socio-political historical context of the slippage of truth and how truth sort of like, falls through our fingers, not unlike the sands of the wasteland, right? Like, so yeah, I don't know. I can't argue with that. But again, in a movie where people are like, I just want to, like, there are certain people who like Mad Max who just want to come see cars blow up, right? And so, like, are those the people you want to test out an ambiguous ending on? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? But also, it isn't ambiguous in that we know what happens next. Like, it's ambiguous in terms of what happens between those two characters, and that, like, Dementus is off the board. Like, is he off the board, shot in the head? Is he off the board hanging from a tree? Is he off the board behind a car? Is he in a hidden room somewhere in the Citadel? We don't know. But, like, it's not like, well, now we don't know what happens next. It's like, well, we actually do. We have scenes from the next episode in the credits that you could have seen 9 years ago. But you didn't. You went to see Pitch Perfect 2. And now that's why it took so long for this to get made.
Well, so that's why I was sort of thinking it might be a resistance to it being a prequel. Like, it's bumping up against, like, well, because we're a prequel, so much of the story is predetermined by the other movie. What can we then, in reaction to that, sort of like make more open? But I don't know. I don't know to what end if that's the reason, I don't know to what end. But anything else before we move on to an Oscars watch? Which will be its own Thunderdome. I'm pretty sure. No, we're good. Okay. So, I mean, yeah, we've hit the 2-hour mark. So, and Greg's probably going to fall asleep soon. So, Oscars watch, where we think about what are Furiosa's chances at the Oscars. So I think the big question is Dune Part 2 v. Furiosa. What happens? Like, who are you putting now that we've actually seen both of these movies, like, who are you putting your money on? Do they split a bunch of categories? Like, how does this shake out, do you think? Or is it just Dune Part 2 all day?
I think it's Dune Part 2 all day.
As someone who liked Furiosa much more than Antonio did, I also think it's Dune Part 2 all day. It's an easier kind of sell. It was a successful movie. It's very much a clear continuation of what came before. They liked it before. They like the new version now. Not a lot of people are arguing like, well, this one's actually better than the last one that won all those Oscars. And I think this one's going to have the stink of people didn't like it. And I don't know if that's going to go away by the time awards come around.
My money's still on Megalopolis, in case the beginning of the show wasn't clear. Hey, you want to lean into ambiguity and unreliability? I got something for you all to see. So I will agree with Antonio and PT, and I will say I think the problem is I did really enjoy Furiosa, but it was another helping of the same dish, right? And whereas while Dune is a continuation, Dune did a lot new and different, more different sound things, more different production design things. And I think it just was a step up instead of more of the very same delicious dinner, but it was just more of the same. Jen, are you going to be contrary to us? You going to make a case?
No, because I think if anything, the narrative that's forming is, well, why is the CG in this one more noticeable than before? Mm-hmm. Which honestly, like, not for all of it, but for certain moments, I agree with. I think, especially having just rewatched Fury Road, like, if I'm really, really looking closely, I'm like, well, all that fire spewing here clearly is not real, or like is being blended with something digital, right? But in Furiosa, so much of that looks like it's green screen, right? Or something. Even if it's not, it just has that kind of more too polished kind of look to it. And in particular, there was a scene where Furiosa's on the bike with her mother, and it really feels like there's just a green screen behind them. Like, and I was like, oh no. And that was partly why it took me a little while to settle into the movie, because I was like, oh no, they were right. People were right about this. Like,
I think it's that little alleyway rock formation Greg mentioned earlier, that looks like it was shot on the volume. That looks like they made the ground level guidelines for it, and they are just like moving like 5 feet, and they're like, well, here we are out in the desert, and that's that one I think is a little tough. So I think that is going to be an issue. I think the only way I think this gets nominated for a ton of stuff. I think there'll be like, yep, we love those people. Get them nominated. That's great. I feel like the only way that things really swing back is if there becomes like like George Miller's old, like if they announce like we're definitely not doing any more of these, and it's like, oh crap, this is the last one. Like, do we reward this when Dune Part 3 is already kind of on the docket? But I don't think they're going to necessarily do it that way. I wonder if it's going to, like, we've been talking about how this could be a bloodbath between these two movies. I wonder if it's going to shake down where it's just kind of like, you know what, costume, Furiosa, you get costume, or whatever, or like you get sound design. Hey, what about you? What about you getting sound? How does that feel? Like, good luck with that. And they get like 1, maybe 2 that they get a front runner status, and they win all the precursors, and Dune gets the rest. Or
I was about to say the costume design is probably, if I'm an Oscar voter, that's what if I were like, I need to give Throw Furiosa one of these, that's probably the one, because I feel like, from Dementus's like parachute cape that Furiosa then like there's so much storytelling being told through the costume specifically that I don't know, I can see it. And it's Jenny Bevan, who's already won a bunch of Oscars for Cruella, and like, you know what I mean? Like the record's there. So maybe I could see sort of like the more technical categories versus design categories. Maybe there's a split where Furiosa gets more of the latter, and then Dune gets more of the former. I don't know. Because even cinematography is going to be tough, because it's a different cinematographer than Fury Road. That guy retired.
He did. And I feel like there are people who want to say like that's the big difference. When I think that really the big difference is that, and I think the reason why it's not going to have the like, oh my God, Fury Road level of support is that it doesn't have that propulsive, like the almost silent movie storytelling. Like, I know all of these are like sort of pitched as they could be a silent movie, blah, blah, blah. But like, this feels more like a historical epic. This feels more like a biblical mythological epic, which the Academy has liked long ago. I don't think that's come up a lot recently as any kind of big winner. And so, that sort of like, oh my God, pure adrenaline cinema, that's not what this is. And so I think when you look at that compared to the epic sweep of Dune Part 2, which again, more people responded to, people like, maybe it's building a different world, as Greg was saying. Yeah, I think we've been spending like 7 minutes saying what Antonio said, which is it's Dune Part 2, and that's it.
I've heard more than one critic say Chris Hemsworth best supporting actor. Is that nuts? That seems nuts to me.
It seems a little nuts to me.
It seems nuts.
But I think they're riding off the high of Ryan Gosling for Barbie, because it's a comedic. Because now I think a lot of people are eager to be like, well, now the Academy likes comedic performances. But I don't know. Maybe it's
I love the idea. I don't think it's in any way likely. I think there has to be an almost total collapse of actual viable candidates for it to get to that point. Sure. I feel like it's much more likely that outside of real Wasteland heads, by like late July, people are going to be like, oh yeah, there was a Mad Max movie this year. And that's kind of going to be it. Like, some of us are just going to be cradling our Blu-rays, our 4K Blu-rays, being like, yes, thank you. And then for the broader conversation, it's stuck in, I think you're right, Jen. Some of those design, maybe costume, maybe production.
Or sound. Because the sound's still very good. Like, it's hard to argue with that. I'm not going to make Greg do his vrums again.
I'm going to go further than Antonio did. I actually think nominations are even questionable, which is maybe a bridge too far, but I see Dune Part 2. I know we have Blitz coming, which sweeps into most of those categories. Jen's absolute beloved, though she's not going to hype draft it, Wicked. Wicked doesn't look great to me personally. I'm not a fan, but that's the kind of film that gets the costume, the hair, the makeup. And so like we start to check off these lanes, and it's like the fantastical thing, the historical thing. I think with one or two other pretty decent films, this might get shut out and I do think that would be unfortunate. But to PT's point, if it's not a commercial success and it's remembered as a failure, people just aren't going to think of it come nomination time. So.
And I do think part of the reason folks didn't think back on Fury Road as not a commercial success is it hung around in the theaters for a long time, and it got over 150 million in America, and it got over like 350, I think, worldwide, which was like, I still think not enough to like make back its budget, but it was like not like a disaster, but like there's certainly a path in 2024 where a movie that starts with only 26 million doesn't crack 100 because they rush it to home, on demand so quickly, and maybe they make $150 million through on demand things, but we'll never know that because they don't report that money. So that's they can kind of act like no it was great until it's time to pay out points, and then they're like no, it was a disaster. But yeah, the vibes will be bad. Anyway, I can't believe Greg went through all of that. We don't know if Furiosa will be nominated and didn't plug his beloved Twisters in sound, which I feel like is
visual
something
effects locked
and
now.
VFX.
Yeah, VFX. Yeah. Wait till that.
The trailer for Twisters at the IMAX screening today. The trailer for Twisters was did not receive a good response from the crowd around me. They were openly jeering.
Oh, really?
As a movie,
you were at a bad theater. Clearly, no.
I mean, you're not wrong necessarily.
Yeah, let's not forget about like the 50 other sequels and prequels that are coming out for the rest of the year. So those there's still a lot of road left, Fury or not. Thank you all so much. I really liked that, we often are in sync actually in terms of our reactions to things, and so it was really nice to hear diverse takes on this movie, and definitely helped me think through and kind of process my knee-jerk reactions to a lot of it. Greg, where can folks find you on the internet?
Hey, when people are listening to this, we are less than a week from a brand new Star Wars show. So I will be reviewing The Acolyte on the Rebel Base Card podcast. And then people can find my reviews of everything else I'm watching, which I'm still mostly keeping up with summer blockbusters, even though we can't keep pace on this show. So if you're out there looking for our thoughts on things that we aren't reviewing on the show, then it's Ion Canon on Letterboxd, EYEONCANON. Why was that so hard to spell this late at night? That must be why.
Yes, as always, we appreciate your staying up late for us West Coasters, Greg. It's really good. And Antonio, where can folks find you? Because I know there's only one place.
There's one place. It's on Letterboxd. LTR Pod. You can find all of us. We all tag with LTR Pod. And you can find me at A Elefano, AELEFANO PT. Where can people find you?
Well, they can also find me on Letterboxd, PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. And they can find the show there as well, as you already said. LTR Pod. You could also look for us, as mentioned earlier, on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. You can send us an email, thelongtakereview@gmail.com. Or maybe the easiest thing to do would be just to subscribe wherever you're listening to this right now. Leave a rating, leave a review. Tell us what we got right or wrong about Furiosa, or mythology, or Twisters, or wherever we missed stuff.
Try to talk Greg down from Megalopolis.
No, I mean, you don't take rope away from an opponent when they're trying to hang themselves. You let it go. But yeah, like, rate, review wherever you're listening, please. We would love to have that. Jen, how about you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sobchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. You three break my heart, and it's not fair. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.
Can I hear one more Wikipedia thing at the end of the recording? In geography, a pole of inaccessibility is the farthest and most difficult to access location in a given landmass, sea, or topographical feature. A geographical criterion of inaccessibility marks a location that is the most challenging to reach according to that criterion. Often it refers to the most distant point from the coastline. So I think it's just supposed to be where the green place is the point of inaccessibility.
Yes.
In the middle of Australia. I didn't know it was a real term. I thought it was.
That was pretty clear.
Well, I knew it was the green place, but I didn't know that it was, an actual geographical term.
Okay. No, that's true. I didn't think of that. I thought that was just George Miller being wordy. Anyway, I think that's our post credits.
Well, that's why I guess
just you being like, excuse me.
That's what I was hoping. I was hoping to throw it out there for that.